On a quiet February morning in 1938, Harvey Samuel Firestone walked through the gardens of his Miami Beach estate one final time. The Florida sun was warm, the ocean breeze gentle. At 69 years old, he had built one of the greatest industrial empires America had ever seen. His tires rolled beneath every Ford automobile. His name was spoken in the same breath as Edison and Ford themselves. But that night, as he drifted to sleep in his oceanfront bedroom, his heart simply stopped beating. The man who had put America on wheels would never wake again. Back in Akron, Ohio, a 118-room mansion stood waiting for a master who would never return. Its name was Harbel Manor, a palace of rubber money and American ambition. Within its walls lived the echoes of laughter and loss, of triumph and tragedy, and in the decades to come, those walls would witness the slow unraveling of one of America's most powerful families. This is the story of Harbell Manor, a dream built on rubber and roads, a monument to love that would outlast its creators, and a reminder that even the greatest fortunes cannot shield a family from heartbreak. The boy who saw the future. To understand the man who built Harbell Manor, we must first travel back to the rolling farmland of Columbiana, Ohio. There, on December 20th, 1868, Harvey Samuel Firestone came into the world on a modest farm built by his German immigrant grandfather. The family name had once been Feuerstein, meaning Firestone in German. It was a name that seemed to foretell the spark of ambition that would one day ignite an empire. Young Harvey grew up knowing hard work. He attended a one-room schoolhouse, learned the rhythms of farm life, and watched his father tend the land with calloused hands and quiet dignity. But even as a boy, Harvey sensed that his future lay beyond the fence posts of the family farm. After graduating from high school, he completed a business course in Cleveland. Then he went to work for his uncle at the Columbus Buggy Company in Detroit. It was there, amid the clatter of wooden wheels and the smell of leather harnesses, that Harvey Firestone saw something that would change his life forever. Automobiles. They were still rare in the 1890s. Most people laughed at them, calling them toys for the rich, contraptions that would never replace the reliable horse. But Harvey watched the wealthy men who could afford these mechanical marvels, and he noticed something crucial. Their rides were rough. Their tires were terrible. The solid rubber wheels transmitted every bump and rut directly into the spine of the driver. Harvey understood immediately that the future of transportation would depend on better tires. Not solid rubber, but pneumatic tires filled with air. Tires that could absorb the shocks of America's rough roads. Tires that would make automobiles comfortable enough for ordinary people to buy. When his uncle's buggy company went bankrupt in 1896, Harvey knew exactly what he wanted to do. He would build tires. Better tires. The best tires in the world. A love story begins. Before Harvey could build his empire, he needed something else. On November 20th, 1895, he found it. Her name was Idabelle Smith, and she came from Jackson, Michigan. She was beautiful, cultured, and possessed a remarkable talent that would later make her famous throughout America. Idabelle could compose music. Their courtship was brief but genuine. Harvey saw in Idabelle not just a wife, but a partner. She saw in him not just ambition, but heart. They married that autumn, and together they would build something extraordinary. Their love would be memorialized in the very name of the mansion they would one day call home. Harbell, Harvey, and Idabelle, forever intertwined. In the early years of their marriage, Harvey and Idabelle moved frequently as he pursued his dream. They had their first child, But tragedy struck early. Their firstborn son, Harvey, lived only briefly before passing away in 1897. The loss marked them both, though they rarely spoke of it publicly. In the years that followed, they would have 6 more children who survived to adulthood. Harvey Jr., Russell Allen, Leonard Kimball, Raymond Christian, Roger Stanley, and a daughter named Elizabeth. Each child would grow up in the shadow of their father's growing empire. Each would eventually work in the family business, and each would carry the weight of the Firestone name into a future none of them could have imagined. The rubber capital of the world. In 1900, Harvey Firestone made a bold decision. He packed up his small family and moved to Akron, Ohio. The city was already becoming the rubber capital of the world. Goodyear was there. B.F. Goodrich was there. The air smelled of vulcanized rubber and opportunity. With just $10,000 in cash and a patent for attaching tires to rims, Harvey founded the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company on August 3, 1900. His first factory employed just 12 men. They made solid rubber tires for fire engines and carriages, working in conditions that would seem primitive by modern standards. But Harvey had bigger plans. He knew that the automobile industry was about to explode. Henry Ford was preparing to revolutionize manufacturing with his assembly line. Soon, ordinary Americans would be buying cars, and every one of those cars would need tires. In 1906, Harvey landed the contract that would make his fortune. Henry Ford agreed to buy 2,000 sets of Firestone tires for his Model T automobiles. It was the largest tire order in history at that time. More importantly, it was the beginning of a friendship that would shape both men's lives. Ford and Firestone were kindred spirits in many ways. Both had grown up on farms. Both were self-made men who had built empires from nothing. Both believed passionately in the future of the automobile, and both remained surprisingly unpretentious despite their enormous wealth. Ford needed reliable tires for his cars. Firestone needed a steady customer for his factory. The partnership worked perfectly. As Ford's production increased, so did Firestone's sales. In the company's first year, it sold $110,000 worth of tires. By 1920, that figure had grown to $115 million. The relationship between Ford and Firestone went far beyond business. They genuinely liked each other. Their families socialized together. Their children grew up knowing one another. The bonds they formed would endure for generations, eventually leading to the most spectacular wedding Akron would ever see. The Vagabonds. As Harvey's wealth grew, so did his circle of friends. And what a circle it was. Henry Ford, the automobile king. Thomas Edison, the wizard of invention. John Burroughs, the beloved naturalist. These men, the most celebrated minds of their generation, formed a bond that transcended business. They called themselves the Vagabonds, and every summer from 1915 to 1924, they embarked on camping trips that became national sensations. But calling them camping trips doesn't quite capture the spectacle. Their caravans included as many as 50 vehicles. They brought servants, cooks, and a fully equipped mobile kitchen. Their dining table hauled through the wilderness on truck beds seated 20 guests. Yet despite the luxury, these trips represented something genuine. 4 men who had conquered their respective industries, choosing to spend their precious free time exploring America together. They chopped wood, told stories around campfires, and debated everything from politics to philosophy. Edison, nearly deaf, would lean in close to hear Ford's animated tales. Burroughs, with his flowing white beard, would lead them on nature walks, naming every plant and bird they encountered. Harvey Firestone was perhaps the most grounded of the group. While Edison and Ford commanded the spotlight, Firestone was content to organize logistics and keep the conversations flowing. He understood that his place in this legendary foursome was earned through friendship, not fame. The Vagabonds' trips weren't merely recreation, they were a masterclass in public relations, though the term had scarcely been invented yet. Ford particularly understood the power of the press. Every campsite was carefully chosen, every photograph thoughtfully staged. Reporters followed the caravan at a respectful distance. Newspapers ran headlines like, "Millions of dollars worth of brains off on a vacation," and "Genius to sleep under stars." Ford's film crew shot silent movies of the expeditions, which played in theaters across the country. The American public was fascinated. Here were the richest men in America, choosing to rough it in the woods. It made them seem accessible, relatable, even lovable. Never mind that their version of roughing it included professional chefs and a portable dining table that seated 20. The message was clear. These titans of industry were still regular Americans at heart. The trips covered enormous distances. In 1918, they traveled from Pennsylvania through West Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Virginia. In 1919, they explored northern New York, Vermont, and New Hampshire. Each journey brought new adventures and new publicity. One particularly memorable moment occurred in 1918 when the Vagabonds stopped for lunch at Swallow Falls in Garrett County, Maryland. They purchased supplies in Oakland and continued on their way, leaving behind a trail of amazed locals who could scarcely believe that Thomas Edison had passed through their town. On one memorable trip in 1921, the Vagabonds visited President Warren Harding at his farmhouse in Vermont. The sight of America's industrial titans sitting in rocking chairs with the president himself captured the nation's imagination. Newspapers ran the photographs for weeks, but the Vagabonds' trips couldn't last forever. John Burroughs died in 1921. The trips became more formal after that, less spontaneous. The wives joined, bringing servants and expectations. By 1924, the fame of the campers had attracted too much attention. Reporters and curiosity seekers followed their every move. The magic was gone. The dream of Harbel Manor. By 1913, Harvey Firestone had achieved more than he had ever imagined possible. His company was worth millions. His tires were rolling beneath cars across America. His friendship with Ford and Edison had made him a celebrity. But something was missing. He wanted a home. Not just any home, but a monument. A place where his children could grow up surrounded by beauty and space. A place where he could entertain the great men of the age. A place that would announce to the world that the Firestone family had arrived. He found the perfect location in West Akron, on an estate that would eventually sprawl across 100 acres. There, high on a hill overlooking the city where he had built his fortune, Harvey Firestone began constructing what would become one of the largest private residences in Ohio. He named it Harbell Manor. The name combined his own name with Idabelle's, a romantic gesture that revealed the deep bond between them. Every time someone spoke the name of the mansion, they would be speaking of their love, the rubber barons of Akron. To understand the world in which Harbell Manor was built, one must understand Akron itself. By the 19-teens, the small Ohio city had become something extraordinary. It was the rubber capital of the world, home to not just Firestone, but Goodyear, BF, Goodrich, and General Tire as well. The population had exploded. In 1900, Akron held just over 42,000 people. By 1910, that number had grown to nearly 70,000. By 1920, It would reach over 200,000. Nowhere in America was growing faster. The reason was simple. Cars needed tires. Cars were the future. And Akron made tires better than anywhere else on Earth. The rubber barons who ran these companies became fabulously wealthy. They built mansions that rivaled anything on the East Coast. Stan Highwit Hall, home of Goodyear co-founder F.A. Seiberling, sprawled across 70 acres and contained over 64,000 square feet. Its great hall rose 3 stories high, dominated by a massive sandstone fireplace. These men competed not just in business but in lifestyle. Their estates featured swimming pools, tennis courts, and elaborate gardens. They hired the best architects and landscape designers. They filled their homes with art collected from Europe. Into this world of competitive grandeur stepped Harvey Firestone. He had arrived in Akron with modest means. Now, just 13 years later, he was building a palace that would rival any of them. A palace of the rubber barons. The construction of Harbel Manor took years and cost a fortune even by the standards of the Gilded Age. When completed, the mansion contained between 55 and 118 rooms, depending on how one counted the servants' quarters and auxiliary spaces. The main house rose 3 stories high, its architecture blending Georgian elegance with American grandeur. The grounds were designed by Alling de Forest, one of the most celebrated landscape architects of the era. De Forest had created gardens for the greatest estates in America, including the grounds of George Eastman House in Rochester. For Harbell Manor, he crafted something extraordinary. Formal gardens stretched in every direction, their geometric patterns visible from the upper floors of the mansion. Fountains sparkled in the sunlight. Rare plants imported from around the world bloomed in carefully tended beds. Inside, the mansion was a showcase of wealth and taste. The rooms were filled with art collected from Europe. Chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors. The library held thousands of books, for Harvey was a genuine reader, not merely a collector. The dining room could seat dozens of guests for the elaborate parties that would soon become legendary. The scale of operation required to run Harbell Manor was staggering. Dozens of servants maintained the house and grounds. There were cooks and butlers, maids and gardeners, chauffeurs and groundskeepers. Each had their place in a carefully organized hierarchy. The mansion functioned like a small hotel, requiring constant attention to keep everything running smoothly. The kitchen was a professional operation. Meals were prepared not just for the family, but for the endless stream of guests who visited. Breakfast might be served in the smaller dining room, lunch on the terrace overlooking the gardens, dinner in the grand dining hall. Each meal required planning, preparation, and precise execution. The grounds required even more attention. The formal gardens needed constant tending. Hedges had to be trimmed to geometric perfection. Flower beds had to be replanted seasonally to ensure continuous bloom. The lawns had to be mowed to precise heights. It was work without end, an eternal struggle against the forces of nature. But the most remarkable feature of Harbell Manor was the swimming pool and its accompanying lounge. This space would later become famous as the site of one of America's greatest social events. Its transformation for that occasion would turn the pool area into, as one newspaper described it, a fairyland of flowers and lights. The mansion also housed one of Idabelle's greatest treasures, a magnificent pipe organ. Music filled the halls of Harbell Manor regularly, for Idabelle was not merely a patron of the arts, but an artist herself. Idabelle's songs. While Harvey built an empire of rubber and steel, Idabelle was quietly creating her own legacy. She had studied music at Alma College in Ontario, learning piano and organ as a girl. Marriage and motherhood had interrupted her formal career, but her talent never faded. In the 1920s and 30s, Idabelle began composing in earnest. Her songs were romantic, melodic pieces that reflected her sensibilities. Titles like In My Garden, If I Could Tell You, You Are the Song in My Heart, and Melody of Love captured the genteel spirit of a woman who had everything material but still longed to create beauty from within herself. Her breakthrough came when the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company launched a radio program called The Voice of Firestone. Starting in 1928, the show broadcast classical music and opera to millions of American homes. It was a bold move for a tire company, but Harvey understood that the program would associate the Firestone name with culture and refinement. The show needed theme music, and who better to provide it than the founder's wife? In My Garden became the closing theme, its gentle melody drifting into American homes every week. The song spoke of rambler roses creeping along walls, of dainty phlox and columbine nodding to trumpet vine. It was a portrait of the gardens Idabelle loved, set to music. When a dispute with the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers temporarily banned the song in 1940, Idabelle composed a new opening theme, If I Could Tell You. The lyrics, written by Madeline Marshall, captured feelings that words alone could not express. It became even more popular than its predecessor. The Voice of Firestone ran for decades, first on radio and then on television. It was one of the first corporate-sponsored programs to present classical music to a mass audience. At a time when popular music dominated the airwaves, the show was an island of culture and refinement. The Voice of Firestone became one of the longest-running music programs in American broadcasting history. It showcased classical music and opera at a time when such fare was rare on the airwaves. Opera stars like Richard Crooks, Eleanor Staber, Robert Merrill, and Joan Sutherland all performed Idabelle's compositions. For a woman of her era and class, it was an extraordinary achievement. Idabelle's love of gardens found expression not only in her music, but in the grounds of Harbel Manor itself. David Burpee, the famous seed company founder, was so impressed with her horticultural knowledge that he named a marigold variety in her honor, the Idabelle Firestone marigold. It became one of the largest and most colorful French marigolds ever developed. Beyond her artistic pursuits, Idabelle was a dedicated philanthropist. In 1929, she donated $400,000 to establish the Idabelle Firestone School of Nursing at Akron City Hospital. The institution trained generations of nurses and provided health care to those who could not otherwise afford it. The golden years. Through the 1920s and into the 30s, Harbell Manor stood as the social center of Akron's elite. The parties were legendary. Politicians, industrialists, artists, and even presidents made their way to the Firestone estate. The swimming pool lounge, with its elegant appointments and easy atmosphere, became the preferred venue for the most important gatherings. The guest list at any Harbell Manor function read like a who's who of American power and influence. Senators and governors rubbed shoulders with captains of industry. Artists and musicians mingled with scientists and inventors. Foreign dignitaries arrived to pay their respects to the man who had helped put the world on wheels. The conversations that took place within those walls shaped American policy and business. Deals were struck over dinner. Alliances were formed in the drawing room. The future of industries was debated in the library, surrounded by Harvey's thousands of books. Yet despite the grandeur, Harbell Manor retained a certain warmth. Unlike some of the great estates of the era, which could feel cold and formal, the Firestone home welcomed guests with genuine hospitality. Idabelle's influence was evident in every detail, from the fresh flowers that filled the rooms to the music that floated through the halls. The children grew up in this atmosphere of privilege and expectation. They attended the finest schools. They traveled to Europe. They learned the family business from the inside out. But they were also taught the value of hard work and the responsibilities that came with wealth. Harvey himself remained surprisingly down to earth despite his wealth. Visitors remarked on his unpretentious manner. He still rose early, as he had on the farm. He still preferred simple American food to elaborate cuisine. He spent his mornings walking the grounds of Harbel Manor, his body present among the flowers and trees, his mind already at work on the problems awaiting him at the office. By the time he arrived at Firestone headquarters around 10 in the morning, he had already planned his day. He was an ideas man, not an inventor. He left the technical details to his engineers, but his instinct for what the market wanted was unerring. In 1908, he had sketched out the concept for a non-skid tire on a notepad. His designers made it work, and the innovation became one of the company's proudest achievements. The Firestone sons grew up in this atmosphere of wealth and expectation. All 5 boys attended the best schools. All 5 joined the company. Harvey Jr., the eldest surviving son, emerged as his father's natural successor. He had served as a naval aviator during World War I, then graduated from Princeton in 1920. His father placed him in charge of the Steel Products Division, and he proved himself capable. In 1921, Harvey Jr. married Elizabeth Park of Decatur, Illinois. The wedding was a significant social event, uniting 2 prominent families. Elizabeth would prove to be a formidable figure in her own right, creating vast collections of porcelain, furniture, fine art, silver, and couture fashion. Her taste was impeccable, and she would maintain it throughout her long life. The global empire. Harvey Firestone's ambitions extended far beyond Akron. In 1926, he orchestrated one of the most ambitious business ventures of the era. Working with the government of Liberia, he leased over 1 million acres of land to establish a rubber plantation. It was the largest rubber plantation in the world, occupying more than 10% of the country's arable land. The town that grew up around the plantation was named Harbel, the same name as the family mansion, honoring both Harvey and Idabelle. The deal was structured to last for 99 years, ensuring a steady supply of raw rubber for Firestone factories, regardless of what happened to other sources. The Liberian venture was controversial even in its own time. Critics questioned the terms of the agreement and the conditions under which workers labored. The League of Nations investigated, though investigators found no evidence that Firestone consciously employed forced labor. The company maintained that it provided healthcare, education, and economic opportunity to the region. Harvey Jr. would later run public relations campaigns to shape the narrative around the Liberian operations. The complicated legacy of those plantations would persist long after the family sold the company, raising questions that historians continue to debate. But in the 1920s and 30s, the Liberian plantation was seen primarily as a triumph of American enterprise. Harvey Firestone had ensured that his company would never be held hostage by foreign rubber suppliers. It was the kind of bold, vertical integration that defined the great industrialists of his era. The end of an era. On February 7, 1938, Harvey Samuel Firestone died in his sleep at Harbell Villa, his beachfront estate in Miami Beach, Florida. The site where he breathed his last would later become the location of the famous Fontainebleau Hotel. He was 69 years old. The cause was coronary thrombosis. He had simply gone to sleep and never awakened. It was a peaceful end for a man who had lived a life of constant motion and ambition. The news spread quickly. Telegraph wires hummed with the information. Radio stations interrupted their programming. Newspapers prepared special editions. In Akron, flags were lowered to half-mast. The city that Harvey had helped build was in mourning. More than 12,000 people came to pay their respects over 2 days of funeral observances. They filed past his coffin in solemn procession, ordinary citizens and dignitaries alike. Members of the Ford and Edison families attended. White House officials sent representatives. Business leaders from across the nation made the journey to Akron. The funeral itself was a grand affair, befitting a man of Harvey's stature. The church was filled beyond capacity. Mourners spilled onto the streets outside, listening to the service through speakers. Hymns rose into the cold February air. But the final burial took place in Columbiana, the small town where Harvey had been born 7 decades earlier. He returned to the land of his fathers, to the cemetery where generations of Firestones had been laid to rest. The farm boy who had built an empire came home at last. Idabelle was devastated. She and Harvey had been married for 43 years. They had built an empire together. They had raised children and buried one. They had entertained presidents and created beauty in their garden and in their music. Now she faced life at Harbel Manor alone. She would live for another 16 years, maintaining the estate and continuing her philanthropic work. The voice of Firestone continued to broadcast, carrying her music into American homes. She never remarried. Her devotion to Harvey's memory was absolute. The years after Harvey's death were both lonely and productive for Idabelle. She threw herself into her music, composing new songs and overseeing performances of her existing work. She continued her philanthropic activities, supporting the nursing school she had founded and contributing to countless other causes. Harbell Manor continued to function as the family seat, though its character had changed. The great parties became less frequent. The political gatherings gave way to family celebrations. The mansion that had once buzzed with the energy of empire building became a quieter place, filled with memories. Idabelle walked the gardens she had designed, tending to the flowers that she had chosen. She played the great organ in the music room, filling the empty halls with melody. She received visitors with the same grace she had always shown, though now there was a sadness beneath her smile. Her sons continued to run the family business, maintaining the legacy their father had built. They visited regularly, bringing their children and grandchildren to the estate. For the younger generation, Harbell Manor was a place of wonder, a castle out of a fairy tale. But time was passing. The world was changing, and Idabelle knew that the Harbell Manor she had known could not last forever. The royal wedding. 9 years after Harvey's death, Harbell Manor hosted what newspapers called the biggest society wedding in Akron's history. On June 21, 1947, Martha Park Firestone, granddaughter of Harvey and Idabelle, married William Clay Ford, grandson of Henry Ford. The union of these two families was more than a love match. It was the joining of two industrial dynasties. Firestone tires and Ford automobiles had been intertwined since 1906. Now the bloodlines would merge as well. The preparations were extraordinary. The entire Firestone public relations team, aided by a New York City firm, handled the details. 3 news offices were established to manage the press. Messengers rushed reporters' stories to Western Union. A plane stood ready to fly photographs to Detroit. Guests filled the 9th floor and part of the 11th floor at the downtown Mayflower Hotel. West Hill Homes accommodated the overflow. 200 people attended a dinner party at Portage Country Club the night before the ceremony. Martha wore a Christian Dior gown, one of the first to appear in Akron from the legendary Paris fashion house. The fabric was iridescent taffeta that changed color with every movement, shifting from lavender to blue to pink. The ceremony took place at 4:30 in the afternoon at St. Paul's Episcopal Church. The bride was radiant. The groom was handsome. The congregation was the cream of American society. 900 guests were invited to the reception at Harbell Manor. As Martha walked down the aisle, she represented the merger of two great American dynasties. On one side sat the Firestones, heirs to the rubber empire. On the other sat the Fords, heirs to the automobile kingdom. The two families had been bound together by business and friendship for decades. Now they would be bound by blood. The ceremony was traditional yet elegant. The vows were spoken. The rings were exchanged. Two families became one. One prominent family member could not attend. Idabelle Firestone, now 82 years old, was recovering from a shoulder injury at City Hospital. But she refused to miss the wedding entirely. A special telephone line was installed between the church and her hospital room. 3 microphones captured every moment of the service, and an amplifier allowed her to hear clearly. The reception transformed the swimming pool lounge into what one reporter called a fairyland of flowers and lights. Traffic jammed West Market Street as guests arrived and departed. The Firestone and Ford families were now formally united, a dynasty that would shape American industry for generations to come. William Clay Ford would become an executive at Ford Motor Company and the longtime owner of the Detroit Lions NFL team. Their son, William Clay Ford Jr., would eventually become executive chairman of Ford Motor Company. The legacy of that June wedding at Harbell Manor continues to ripple through American business today. The quiet end. On July 7, 1954, Idabelle Smith Firestone passed away at Harbell Manor. She was 79 years old. Her funeral was held in the mansion she and Harvey had built together, the home that bore the combined letters of their names. Her sons made generous donations in her memory. The organ from Harbell Manor, the instrument that had filled the halls with music for decades, was redesigned and installed in a new chapel at St. Paul's Episcopal Church. The Idabelle Firestone Memorial Chapel was consecrated in April 1958. With both Harvey and Idabelle gone, the question arose: what would become of Harbell Manor? The answer came in 1959. The mansion, that palace of rubber money and American dreams, was demolished. The decision was driven by practical concerns. The estate was expensive to maintain. The taxes were enormous. None of the children wished to take on the burden of living there. But there was something deeper at work. The world that had created Harbell Manor no longer existed. The Gilded Age was over. The rubber barons had passed from the scene. The great estates that had symbolized their power were being dismantled across America. The wrecking ball swung, and the walls that had hosted presidents and industrialists came tumbling down. Room by room, floor by floor, Harbell Manor was reduced to rubble. The chandeliers that had cast prismatic light were sold or salvaged. The fireplaces that had warmed generations were torn apart. The gardens that Idabelle had tended with such care were torn up. The swimming pool where the Fairyland wedding reception had been held was filled in. The organ was removed to the church, where it would find new life in the memorial chapel. Anything of value was auctioned or distributed among the family. In place of Harbell Manor rose the Georgetown condominiums. The 100 acres became a suburban development, indistinguishable from countless others that spread across post-war America. The survivors. Across the street from where Harbell Manor had stood, another Firestone mansion survived. This was the home that Harvey Jr. and Elizabeth Park Firestone had built in 1926, a French chateau-style residence designed by Boston architect Charles R. Greco. Unlike his parents' demolished palace, Harvey Jr.'s mansion endured. Subsequent owners maintained its Louis XVI interior exactly as Elizabeth had designed it. The property even expanded over the years, growing from 1.9 acres to 3.29 acres when an adjoining lot was purchased. But tragedy haunted the younger generation. Harvey Jr. and Elizabeth had 4 children: Elizabeth Ann, Martha, and Harvey Samuel III. Young Harvey was born with a condition that left him unable to walk. He was confined to a wheelchair throughout his life. Despite his physical limitations, Harvey III possessed a brilliant mind. With the aid of a tutor, he graduated magna cum laude from the University of Miami. He finished 3rd in his class at Stetson University Law School in 1959. He married Beverly Lou McFarland in 1956, and they had a daughter named Diane Elizabeth. His tutor, Everett Cushman, had planned to open a law practice with him. Everyone who knew Harvey III spoke of his courage and determination. He had overcome obstacles that would have defeated most people. Those who worked with him marveled at his intellect and his spirit. His life story was one of triumph against seemingly impossible odds. Born into wealth, but denied the physical capabilities that most take for granted, he had refused to accept limitations. He had pushed himself academically, achieving honors that would have been impressive for anyone, let alone someone who could not even hold a pen. His marriage to Beverly seemed to promise a future filled with possibility. Their daughter, Diane Elizabeth, was the light of their lives. Harvey had everything to live for: a loving family, a promising career, the resources of one of America's wealthiest families at his disposal. Then, in May of 1960, Harvey III traveled to Havana, Cuba, with his cousin David Firestone and his attendant William Didas. They checked into the Havana Hilton Hotel, planning a 3-day stay. Cuba was in turmoil that year. Fidel Castro had seized power just the year before. The relationship between the island nation and the United States was deteriorating rapidly. But wealthy Americans still traveled there, perhaps drawn by the sense of danger, perhaps simply following old habits. On the night of May 5th, while his attendant was bathing, Harvey III crawled from his couch to the balcony of his 20th floor suite. What happened next remains unclear. He either fell or chose to fall over the 3.5-foot barrier. He was found on the roof of the 3rd floor, having struck a parapet above the main entrance. He was 32 years old. Cuban officials ruled his passing a consequence of his own choosing. His cousin told police that Harvey had attempted something similar 2 months earlier in Florida. The news shocked everyone who knew him. How could someone so full of promise, someone who had fought so hard to overcome his challenges, reach such a moment of despair? The answer, if there was one, went with him. The brilliant young man who had conquered law school from a wheelchair, who had a wife and young daughter waiting for him, who had his whole life ahead of him, was gone. He was buried in Columbiana Cemetery, near his great-grandfather who had built the empire. The company's fate. The Firestone Tire and Rubber Company survived its founder by half a century. Harvey's sons sat on the board of directors after his death. Harvey Jr. and Raymond both served as chief executive officer at various times. They guided the company through World War II, helping develop synthetic rubber when natural supplies were cut off by the conflict. During the war, the company was called upon by the government to produce not just tires, but artillery shells, aluminum kegs for food transport, and barrage balloons. Workers at the Akron plants labored around the clock to support the war effort. The company ranked among the top 60 American corporations in wartime military contracts. After the war, the company expanded aggressively. New plants opened across the country and around the world. The Firestone name became synonymous with quality and reliability. The Indianapolis 500 continued to be won on Firestone tires year after year. The brothers worked well together, each bringing different strengths to the enterprise. Harvey Jr. provided strategic vision. Raymond handled operations. Russell focused on agriculture and community relations. Leonard and Roger contributed in their own ways. But the world was changing. The tire industry was consolidating. Competition from overseas manufacturers intensified. Japanese and European companies were producing high-quality tires at lower costs. The American companies struggled to keep up. By the late 1970s, Firestone found itself more than $1 billion in debt, losing $250 million annually. In 1979, a new president named John Nevin was brought in to save the hemorrhaging company. His actions were drastic. He closed 9 of the company's 17 manufacturing plants, including 6 in a single day. He relocated the company from its ancestral home in Akron to Chicago. He spun off non-tire-related businesses, including the famous Firestone Country Club. These moves boosted the stock price, but they marked the end of Firestone as an independent American company. In 1988, the Japanese tire manufacturer Bridgestone acquired Firestone. The company that Harvey had founded with 12 employees and $10,000 was now a subsidiary of a foreign corporation. Today, Firestone operates as part of Bridgestone Americas, Incorporated. The brand survives, but the family ownership is long gone. What remains? Stand on the corner of West Market Street in Akron today, and you will find no trace of Harbel Manor. The Georgetown condominiums occupy the land, their modern units bearing no relationship to the grandeur that once stood there. Only old photographs and newspaper clippings preserve the memory of the mansion's existence. The Harvey Jr. mansion across the street still stands, one of the few surviving Firestone family residences. It was listed for sale in recent years for $8.65 million, a price that would have been unimaginable in Harvey Sr.'s youth, but seems modest compared to the fortune he amassed. In Columbiana, Ohio, Harvey's birthplace has been preserved. His friend Henry Ford had the original farmhouse disassembled and moved to Greenfield Village in Michigan, where it remains part of a larger outdoor museum dedicated to American innovation. The Harvey S. Firestone Recreational Park in Columbiana, donated by Harvey and Idabelle in 1933, still serves the community. The Idabelle Firestone Gathering Place and Garden, dedicated in 2022, honors her legacy with an outdoor amphitheater and heritage plantings. At Princeton University, the main library is named Firestone Library in Harvey's honor. It is among the largest university libraries in the world, a fitting tribute to a man who genuinely loved books. The Harvey S. Firestone Memorial, a large sculpture created by James Earl Fraser and Donald DeLue, was dedicated in 1950 in Akron. It now stands at the Bridgestone Americas Technology Center, a corporate descendant of the company Harvey founded. In 1974, Harvey was inducted into the Automotive Hall of Fame. Firestone High School in Akron bears his name. The Links at Firestone Farms, a golf course in Columbiana that opened in 2003, sits on the site of the former family homestead. The meaning of Harbel. What does the story of Harbell Manor teach us? Perhaps it is a tale of American ambition, of a farm boy who saw the future in rubber wheels and built an empire on that vision. Perhaps it is a love story of Harvey and Idabelle and the mansion they named for their joined hearts. Perhaps it is a story about the fleeting nature of material success. Harvey built a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars, He constructed a mansion with over 100 rooms. He entertained presidents and shaped industries. Yet within 2 decades of his death, both the company and the mansion had passed out of family hands. But perhaps it is also a cautionary tale. The greatest fortunes cannot prevent tragedy. Harvey buried a son in infancy. His grandson chose to end his own life. His granddaughter married into another dynasty, but that too brought its own sorrows and complications. The mansion itself, that 118-room palace, lasted less than 50 years. It was built to stand forever, but it was demolished when the economics no longer made sense. In the end, it was just a building, and buildings can be torn down. What truly endures? The music, perhaps. Idabelle's songs are still performed. If I Could Tell You and In My Garden remain in the repertoire of classical singers. Her melodies continue to move listeners who never knew her name. The friendships endure in memory. The image of Edison, Ford, Firestone, and Burroughs gathered around a campfire, 4 titans of American enterprise enjoying nature together, has become part of our national mythology. The innovations endure. Every tire with non-skid treads owes something to that sketch Harvey made on his notepad in 1908. Every pneumatic tire that absorbs the bumps of the road traces its lineage to his vision, and the family endures. The Ford and Firestone bloodlines merged in that fairy tale wedding of 1947. William Clay Ford Jr., great-great-grandson of Harvey Firestone and great-grandson of Henry Ford, leads one of the world's largest automakers today. The final reflection. Stand where Harbell Manor once stood, and let your imagination reconstruct its walls. See the gardens stretching to the horizon. Hear the sound of Idabelle's organ drifting through open windows. Watch as Harvey walks among his flowers in the early morning, planning the day ahead. They are gone now, Harvey and Idabelle. Their children are gone. Their grandchildren have passed or grown old. The mansion they built has been erased from the landscape, replaced by the ordinary dwellings of ordinary people. But something remains. Call it a legacy. Call it a memory. Call it the echo of a name that meant fire and stone, that came from German immigrants and became synonymous with American achievement. Harbell. Harvey and Idabelle. A mansion and a love story. An empire and a family. A triumph and a tragedy. The Firestones built their fortune on wheels that rolled forward, always forward, carrying America into the future. They could not know where those wheels would lead. They could not foresee the heartbreaks or the demolitions. They could only build what they could build and love who they loved. In the end, that is all any of us can do. The roads they paved are still traveled today. The tires they invented still grip the pavement, and somewhere, in old recordings and sheet music, Idabelle's voice still sings of gardens and love, of feelings that cannot be expressed in ordinary words. If I could tell you, she wrote, and in her music, she did. The sun sets over Akron now, as it set over Harbell Manor for 46 years. The city that Harvey chose as his home has changed beyond recognition. The rubber capital of the world has lost its rubber factories. The great estates have been subdivided or demolished. But the story remains, and stories, unlike mansions, cannot be torn down. They can only be told and told again until they become part of who we are. This was the story of Harbell Manor, a story of rubber and roses, of fortunes made and hearts broken, of a man and woman who built a palace for love and named it after themselves. Harvey and Idabelle. Harbell. Forever intertwined, forever remembered, forever gone, but not forgotten. Never forgotten. The story of Harbell Manor continues to resonate today. It speaks to our dreams of success and our fears of loss. It reminds us that even the greatest achievements are temporary, that even the strongest families face tragedy, and that even the grandest mansions can be reduced to memory. But it also speaks to something more hopeful. The love between Harvey and Idabelle endures in the very name of their estate. Their legacy lives on in the innovations they pioneered, the music they created, and the family they raised. In the end, that may be the true meaning of Harbell Manor. Not the building itself, which is gone, but what it represented. A dream shared between two people who loved each other. A vision of what hard work and imagination could achieve. A monument to the belief that tomorrow could always be better than today. Harvey and Idabelle. Harbell,